Okay, so in the last video, we got our login form working, and it's pretty ugly. Let me tab over to it. We can check it out. In this video, what I want to do is, well, we're going to get our user schema set up. We're going to get it logged in and everything. That way we can query off of our user schema to be able to improve some of our interface, such as being able to show this login and register sort of when the user's logged in, instead of just having all of these things that aren't necessarily important showing all at once. So let's come back to our application, and in our API folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and this is just going to be users. Okay. Inside of this users folder, I'm going to create a new file, which is capital user.graphql. This is going to be the schema for the user. Now in here, I'm going to say type, and the type is simply just going to be a user. Now check this out. I'm going to have an ID, which is a string, and an exclamation point here because it's going to be required. And I'm going to have a field called email. Now email is going to be a string as well. And this is going to be one of the fun ones. We're going to get to actually do something really cool here with our resolvers, something that we haven't seen just yet. And since that's pretty much all the information we're caring about in terms of a user right now, that's going to be it, okay? And in another video, I'm going to show you how we can have our type of query in here as well. But for right now, we're just going to keep this as type of user. Now I'm going to head to my register APIs file here, and I'm going to import the schema. So I'm going to do that as, let's actually move this one to the bottom. I just copied this line, and this is going to be import users schema from API users user.graphql, and I can throw it into our type defs, where we had an array of a test schema, we had a resolution schema, and now we're going to have a comma users schema. Okay. So this is pretty much what we need to get our users schema up and running. If we check our server, there should be no errors whatsoever at this point. We haven't really done anything crazy. Now next, I'm going to go ahead and create a resolver. So just like we had in our resolutions resolvers file, I'm going to just basically copy and paste some of this line of code, but all I really need is this export default query. Okay. So in the users folder, we're going to do a new file, and this is going to be resolvers.js, and paste this in here just like so. Okay, so we're going to export default query, and that query is just going to be, and this could be something, anything you'd like. It could be user, and it could be current user. In this case, I kind of just like user as a way to say, hey, this is the current user that's logged in here. Now this one's going to be interesting because in our past query, we had to accept some arguments, or we used the user ID to find our resolutions here. Instead of that, one of the actual context, remember we had user ID, but we also had user itself. So we could pull out user straight from our context and simply just return user. Now, one thing I should note is if the user isn't logged in, user's, I think, set to null or undefined, and that might cause some troubles if this resolver needs to return an object. So we could always say user or an empty object. I'm not 100% positive that I need this or empty object, but I'm just being safe here, okay? So as you can see in our user resolver, we simply have defined a new query user, which doesn't do anything with object or args, but it does pull out the user from context and returns it. Now at this point, we'll again want to register this user into our API here. We can have another copy and paste fest down here, and we can, I like copying and pasting this resolvers one here. We can say users resolvers, and it's from API users and then the resolver file. We'll copy this and then throw this into our merge down here, where we have test resolvers and resolution resolvers. Okay, and apparently Prettier wants that to be on one line for some reason, even though it's kind of a long line. But as you can see here, all we simply did was merge it into our test resolvers, resolution resolvers, and users resolvers, okay? So that said, now we should actually be good to go with this. However, it looks like query.user is defined in resolvers, but not in schema. Right. Okay, so this is an issue that we're going to solve in a better way in the next video. But for this time, I'm simply going to, just like we did in our test schema, add on our user schema because we need to define it in the query schema. Again, I'm going to show you a better way to do this in the next video. And again, instead of having just an output of an array of users or whatever, if you remember our type itself was defined as user, that means we can say, hey, it's just going to simply output a user. So this is, again, just a stopgap. We're going to fix this test schema up at some point here. And now our server is restarted and we should be able to check out our graphical. I'm gonna head to my graphical and I can come in here and I can say user and then maybe give me the ID. Hit play, and you can see what's going on here. Cannot return null for the non-nullable field. Now this error is coming up specifically because, well, in our schema, we defined a user schema, we said the ID has to exist. And since nobody's logged in at this moment, what we're returning is an empty object. Now, that empty object doesn't contain a user ID. So a quick solution would be to just say, hey, maybe the ID isn't actually required and we can remove that exclamation point. Now let's just say the ID isn't required anymore. So before you make a change like that, you want to make sure that that ID certainly isn't required. Now, luckily in our case, it's not actually required for the query. I'm not quite sure why I was thinking it was at the time, but we can just simply remove that. And now when I run our query in here, it gives us a user with an ID of null, which is actually a decent way to check to make sure a user is logged in, right? If we have an ID that's null, then therefore they're not logged in. Okay, so let's check it out here. We have our user query. I'm gonna actually sign in now. Login user. Okay, we can see my resolutions have now officially changed to what my actual resolutions are. And if I run the same query again, I'm going to get my user ID. So we know that our user query is now working. Now, next step here is to write a query in our app. If we head to our app.js, you'll remember we had our resolutions query right here. Now, this query is named resolutions, but it doesn't necessarily need to only bring in information about resolutions. In fact, if we were to copy this query as it is, even with the name query in here, resolutions, let's paste it in here, we could see, okay, it gives us a resolution. But check it out. We could also just say, hey, give me the user ID as well inside of this whole thing. And this is one of the cooler things about GraphQL is that, well, even though this query is grabbing us our resolutions, we can say, hey, give me this other stuff too. And GraphQL is going to know what to do. So as you can see here, this looks pretty nice. So let's go ahead and copy this query back and paste it back in here. Now, you don't have to do that. You could have typed it directly in your text editor, and that's fine. I pretty much mostly do it that way anyways. But this way gives us the ability to confirm that the actual query is going to return what we want it to. So now, because of that, we should have a user prop, because of this line right here, brought into our React component. Now, this React component is getting a little ugly, but let's go ahead and not worry too much about that right now. And we can simply have a ternary operation here, ternary operator. And we can say, hey, if, let's bring in the user prop. If the user.id, right, because null is going to be a falsy value, if the user.id, then we're going to want to show them the logout button, okay? So this one right here. Otherwise, so we have a colon and then parentheses. Now in here, since I don't have the ability to use fragments on this app, I don't have Babel set up for it, I'm just going to make a div right now. This needs to be refactored into its own component anyways, and we can just throw the register and login form inside of here. Okay, so as you can see here, let's check it out, make sure this all worked. But if the user ID exists, then we'll show them the logout button. If it doesn't, then show them the registration or the login form. Again, this needs to be in its own thing. And likewise, we should eventually be hiding this resolution form and resolutions as well, but that's something for another video. And check it out. We should now see, look, check it out. We have our logout button. We click logout and instantly the logout goes away, and we now have our registration and login forms. We can reverse this by logging in, login user, show that as well. So in the next couple of videos, we're going to be doing some really nice things here to clean up things a little bit. We're going to show you how to extend a type, which we haven't done yet. And we're going to show you how to make a custom resolvers so that our email actually returns an email instead of right now, it's not going to really return anything. If we were to say, hey, give me the email, it's not going to give us anything just yet. And that has to do because Meteor's email is currently stored inside of an object called emails. That is an object full of arrays that has an address and a validated object and stuff like that. So right now, just simply saying, hey, give us the email, there's nothing that lines up one-to-one with the user object that says email, so therefore nothing is output. So we're going to do some custom work to fix that, and you're going to see one of the cooler aspects of GraphQL involved in that. So as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. I hope you're enjoying this free series so much. If you want to help support Level Up Tutorials, head on over to leveluptutorials.com and either become a pro or purchase some stuff from the shop. It doesn't matter. As long as you help support, I can continue to create excellent free and paid tutorial content. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.